Hello, I'm Brian Gale, a SAS technical training instructor. Traffic lighting values on a SAS report is a topic that consistently comes up in my classes. SAS has an interesting programmatic method for accomplishing this with some of its report's procedures. In this video, we're going to discuss a method that combines commonly used programming concepts that you likely already understand to accomplish our traffic lighting effect. So let's go be a little creative and start programming. To me, when I hear the term traffic lighting, it has the following meaning. It is a way to dynamically add color effects to report output that is based on data values displayed on the report. I have two demonstrations that we will walk through. All the program examples, the data, the slides, and some additional reference material will be available to you for an after video review on your own. I will share that GitHub link with you later in the video. To get started, let's discuss what we are about to accomplish with a brief overview. For this first task, we will start with the SAS Help demographics data. This data set I specifically chose to make it easy to reference on your own, as it is part of any SAS installation SAS Help base SAS library. This contains some older country demographic data. I think it's around 1998 to 2004 data. The demographics include population data, poverty data, education data, and I will be adapting this data set somewhat by removing any identifying country values and replacing them with arbitrary random country IDs. The specific column data we will be applying a traffic lighting effect to will be the primary education school enrollment percentages that are in this data set. The result of this data massaging will go into a new data set called work.education. This will be the data that we will be using to generate our traffic lighting reports. We will also take advantage of some ODS features. ODS stands for the Output Delivery System, and one of its features allows us to create files in various application formats, such as Excel, Adobe Acrobat, HTML file output, and many others. We will use these features of ODS to create actual files that we can push into Excel, Acrobat, and a little later in a second demonstration, we'll create some HTML files using this technique. In addition, we will also use ODS to apply various visual style and presentation attributes to the output. Attributes such as foreground and background colors, font weights, and a little bit later in our second task, we will talk about adding hyperlinks from one report output so that we can link to another report output. To apply these different ODS attributes, we will be using formats in SAS. User-defined formats are probably something you're very aware of. We use them commonly just simply to display a stored value that we have in a data set in a different way in our report. That's the most common usage, I would say, of a format, but also we can use formats to do lookup values and align those lookup values to other data that we have. For us, in this demonstration, we're going to use the formats to actually align our style attributes to our data values that will be coming out on the report. When we combine all of this together, the massaged data and work.education, our ODS style attributes, our user-defined formats, and then some option references that we will use on some proc print statements, we will have the desired effects display on our good friend, the proc print procedure. And that's where we're headed. One last thing to discuss. As we progress through the code, I'm sure you will think of many ways that the code can be made more elegant, maybe by adding some macro programming techniques or replacing some of the code with different programming alternatives, it really was my intent to be as demonstrative as possible with the program code so that there will be few questions about how the code works. As you progress forward on your own, please feel free to be creative and take advantage of other concepts in SAS coding. All right, well, let's get to the program. I'm using SAS Enterprise Guide 8.3, and I have quite a few comments in this program. And it's really just this one program file that has everything that I will be discussing today. I'm not going to go and read all of the comments to you. I'll explain the different programming code as we go along. And then you'll be able to, again, reference this later on your own after the video. So the first thing I'm doing is creating a macro variable called outPath. And this is where I'm going to place all of these files that I'm going to be creating throughout this demonstration. This would be a path or a directory that you would need to change in this program so that it would point to wherever you want the output to go on the system that you would be running this program on. Let me just run this so that we can have that outPath macro variable in effect. Okay, just check the log and don't get any notes about that, but it's now set up. All right, well, let's talk about this input data. We've got the SAS help demographics data, and I'm going to print about 10 rows from that data set. And this is the original data that I will be manipulating a little bit. I have a second print here where I've added a format statement for these school percentage columns that we'll be using as the columns that have the data we want to colorize. And I just put the names of the columns without a format on the format statement. And this actually will remove the format so we can see the underlying data that is in the data set without being formatted. So let me run these two steps, and I'm just going to enlarge this a little bit so we can see it. And here is the original data, and it does have different country names and specific codes related to those countries. I'm going to remove all that just to make this very generic. And then you can see the school percent columns that I'm going to be using are really these point whatever percent in the underlying data set. We do have some rows that have missing values for these percentages, and I intend on simply saying there's a 0% there when I have both columns being missing values. All right, so that's the input that we're using in the SAS help library. This is the data step I'm using to create my work.education table. Now, the first thing I'm doing is using the rand function to just generate a random number for all the different country rows. And I'm using a very simple distribution. This first argument is what distribution you want the rand function to use, and it has many distribution options for you to choose. I'm using one of the simplest, just simply to assign an integer. And the second and third arguments represent the range of values that I want the rand function to use to generate the number. And the rand function does not automatically give you absolutely unique numbers. There could be duplicates that could occur, but if you make the range large enough, the likelihood of that is very slim. And there are some discussions about this. If you were to look the rand function up, it goes into a little bit of an explanation on how that works. This will work fine for us. We'll get our unique numbers, and we'll assign those numbers to country ID. Out of that demographics table in SAS help, I'm only keeping those school percent columns and a population column just to give us a little bit of a sense of size of the country. And then I also am going to create a new column called net primary percent. And this will be another percentage column that is based on taking basically the average of the two school percent columns so that I have an overall average for the country. Now, you'll note I'm using a sum function where I'm adding the two school percentages and a 0. So if I have two missing values, I'll actually get a 0 value out of the sum. And then I'm dividing whatever that number is by 2. And then I am rounding it. I have it nested in a round function to the nearest hundredth so that we just get rounded percentage numbers. I am adding a percent format onto that new column, but that's all the massaging I'm going to do to the data. And we'll be using work.education going forward. So let me just enlarge this a little. We can see here are the school percentages. These are all formatted, remember. So we're seeing the formatted values out. All right. So our data is done. I'm just going to do a quick test on making sure I have unique values for my country IDs. And what I am doing here is I'm comparing to the original data set, SASHELP demographics, by getting an N-levels report out of my PROC-FREAK procedure. The name of the countries are in this column name, and I am basically not going to print the frequency reports specifically that says here are how many counts for this name. I'm hoping they're all one, but the N-levels report is the report that comes out of PROC-FREAK that says here's how many distinct values or levels that this data set has. And I believe there are 197 rows, so I'm expecting 197 to be that number coming out of that N-levels report. And then I'm doing the same thing for the new data set that I'm creating, work.education, only this time it's on my new country ID column. And if I run this, let's go ahead down below. I have a print of the new data as well. Let's go ahead and do that. And I can see, let me enlarge once again, that indeed the original data had 197 unique rows, and the new data set does as well for country ID. So they are unique. And then here's a sampling of the data where I do have all my percentages unformatted listed out here. So I am good to go. This data is ready for me to use. And now what I'm going to do is create my formats, my user-defined formats that will relate those percentage values to different style attributes. And the attributes that I'm going to form are the background color based on, again, those different percentages, the foreground font color, and then the weight of that font. And so in the world of color, there are many different codes that are standardized in the industry. One that we're going to use, and I like to use mostly because it's simply naming a color, are SAS color names that are available to you in the SAS environment. But also there are colors that are represented by this red, green, blue code, which generally is a hexadecimal code. There's also another color code called hue, lightness, and saturation. I've seen the abbreviation HLS and HSL both. So if you want to go and do a web search, you can find it on either one of those strings. And it too has a code that is both hexadecimal and degree in a 0 to 360 degree circle on what the hue and lightness and saturation should be. And so it's a different code, but also used in the industry. And then there's a gray color code. And this is represented with the word gray and then a hexadecimal value to indicate a different gray shade. And so I'm actually applying all the different versions of what I talked about in my formats. And again, because we're in SAS, I like using just the names of colors. And so in this first format, I thought I would show you all of the different options utilized. And then in the other two formats, I simply use the colors. So for the background color, if I have a percent that's 70% or above, and you'll note this dash does not have an angle bracket on either side. This is indicating a range in a proc format. Proc format, user-defined formats allow us to create formats of our own using this value statement. We name the format, and then we have to provide information to the left of the equal sign that is the data expected to be encountered. And what it is, we want to then transform that data into. And so when I have a range here, I want that range to have this light green assigned color. Between 60 exactly, you'll note there's no angle bracket on the left of the dash, but there is one on the right of the dash that says 60% up to, but not including 70%. I want yellow aligned to that. And then 50 up to, but not including 60%, a form of red called tomato. It's a little lighter color of red. And then from 0 up to, but not including 50%, I want that to be a gray 00, which is really black in the grayscale coloring. Now, if I have a 0 value, remember my sum was 0 if I had 2 missing school percent values, and I'm going to have the background color be blue, and this is that color blue in HSL coded values. And then this is RGB, just a hexadecimal value, which stands basically for white in red, green, blue code. Now, you'll note there's a keyword other in the proc format, and that just means if I encounter a value that's not part of what I expressed here, then all other values will have a white background, okay? The way formats work is if you do not have a value coded in your format that you do encounter in the data, then the data just shows up as it was stored in your data set, and there will be no format applied in that case. It doesn't fail anything, it just doesn't have a format to relate to, and it doesn't show up for that particular value. So I used other to encounter all values, and we'll see how that has an effect a little bit later. For foreground fonts, I said from 70% all the way up to 1% exactly inclusive, I want the font to be black, and then from 50 to up to, but not including 70%, a dark blue font, and then from 0 all the way up to, but not including 0.5, a white font, and then all else, if I encounter some other value, just make it a black font. And likewise, you can see I've done the same set of breakdown for the weights of the fonts, where I have a medium, a bolded, an extra bolded font, and then medium again. So I'm going to run these formats. All these do is it basically compiles them for my SAS session the way that we default and in a SAS session, and we will get these out there, and then we don't have to worry about them. They're ready to use for the rest of the session. We can save these more permanently, but the way that I'm doing it here, it is going into a catalog under the work library. And of course, when we shut SAS down, the work library is removed and deleted. And so anything underneath it would also be removed. So we'd have to run these in our new session again if we wanted them to be in effect in some other future SAS session. In Enterprise Guide, there is a tool, I might as well show you this, that is called the Catalog and Formats Explorer. And now that we've compiled some formats and we place them in our catalog under the work library, I'm going to show you that we can actually see that they did get out there. So I've opened up this Explorer window, and I'm going to go to the work library. And here is formats. And when I click on formats, we can see here are my formats ready to be used, saved in this formats catalog under the work library. So we're a go. We're ready to move forward. I now have my format set. I have my data set. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and apply my attributes onto a report. And I'm going to do a couple things here. I am going to first run a few different versions of creating an Excel workbook of my output. And so I have a couple of things to talk about. I have my title statements. These are just normal base SAS title statements. And then I have two statements, one ODS Excel statement that has a file equal option that says, I want to put this new XLSX workbook out to this location, my out path, and then I want to create this file, traffic light v1.xlsx. I have an option on here, and this is an option that applies to an ODS Excel destination statement that says take those titles you had and embed them into the worksheet that you're creating. And so I said embedded titles equal yes. This one semicolon ends that one statement. I now have this file open, and when I run a procedure, that procedure is going to create a worksheet in my new workbook. And it will create a different worksheet for each procedure step you run, as long as you keep this file open. And that's the default nature of how ODS Excel will work. When I'm done, you have to put an ODS Excel close to say, don't add any more content into this workbook. And so that closes up the file, and then it's ready to be viewed by anybody who has Excel. They don't need SAS. They can just see your report in Microsoft Excel. Now, let's talk about the print a little bit before I run this. Proc print is reading that work education table, and I have a var statement with this keyword underscore all underscore on it, which says I want to apply these style options that follow a slash on this statement. Here's the option style. Here is data, and this data is the location of the report that I want to have these style affect. And so the data, or the actual data values, are what I'm trying to affect. There are different locations on a print report or other procedures that use this same ODS style syntax. There are different areas on the report that you can affect. I'm just affecting the data piece. And we'll look at some of those locations. I have a link to some documentation a little later. The syntax says, all right, for the data, I want to apply these different style attributes. So after that equal sign, we see here we use the style option font underscore weight, and we're going to use our weight format. For the foreground font, we're going to use my other format, describing the different foreground fonts I want, and then the same for the background colors. I'm now going to have it reference my format for background colors. Now, what this means is it's going to take the data values on each row and apply our format to those data values, and we will see the different colors based on the different data values that come out on our report. This is syntax. You just have to learn it, and there, again, is documentation for many, many more style options. And again, I'll try to show a link to that a little bit later. For now, let's just run this and see what happens. So, in the results window, you can actually see the standard default style, which I believe is HTML blue. And this comes out. We can see my zeros have that blue background. All the values that are 70% or above have the green background. And as I go down, we can actually see when the percentages start changing a little more, that we have all the different assigned colors based on our data values. Now, remember, I applied this set of formats to all the columns, underscore, all, underscore. And so we see the white background. I'm not sure it's really any different than the overall report style that is being used for this report by default, but we will see a difference a little later in a different version of what I'm trying to do. Let me go over in Enterprise Guide. I could just click here on this XLSX line that got generated, showing me it also created a Microsoft Excel workbook. And here is the workbook content, again, with that same HTML blue style. That's the default style. And then we have a tab that is generated for us, and SAS made up a name, dataset work.edu. We see that the titles got in here. Here are the column headers. And I can scroll down, and the titles and the column headers scroll off the page, but all the data is there and all the coloration is there too. And these are individual cells still, so that we can do Excel work with this data. All right, you can get out of there. I do want to show you something else. There is a way for us to see the generalized colors that come with a style in SAS. There are many styles that we can choose from instead of the default style. And there's an actual, if I go to Tools, there's a Style Manager here. If I open that up, we now see the default is this HTML blue in Enterprise Guide. And we saw exactly how this looks. But we can change that, and we'll see. I'm going to use another option in order to change it, and we could change it to any one of the styles you see off on the left side here in this list. I'm going to use Barrett's Blue as one I'm going to be using later. If I click on that, we can see it's a slightly different overall report style. We have some gray background colors and blue background colors for different parts of the report. Another style I'll be using is Harvest. I can click on that and we'll see, oh, that's pretty different, right? So we have various different styles, and these are all here for us to choose from right with the install of our SAS product. So HTML blue is the default, but we can actually change the style for our files that we're generating out. I'm going to cancel out of the Style Manager. I don't believe a Style Manager exists with Studio yet, or the Windows environment. So Enterprise Guide is unique that way for now. And there is, though, a nice procedure called template where we can actually list the styles out. I'm going to run this code, and we'll see here is a report generated where at least you could see all of the delivered styles that you could choose from. And so you do have this. I guess I should make it a little bigger. There we go. You do have this in any user interface, whether it's Studio or Windows or Enterprise Guide. You can always run that. Okay, well, let's go on to another version. In that first version and first file that I generated, we had the titles and the column headers scrolled off the page. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm actually going to add some additional options to my ODS open statement. I called it an open statement because I'm going to open a new workbook file. This is going to be version 2 of my traffic light.xlsx. And I have not just embedded titles in this version, I have a couple other options, actually a few other options that I've added to this ODS statement. Let's talk them through. The sheet name option says, instead of SAS, you naming it, whatever you think you should name it, like the dataset name, I'm going to name it. And so my worksheet name will now come out as education data on the tab at the bottom of the worksheet. Also, I want to freeze the header information. And so I'm going to just turn that on so that they won't scroll off the top of the page. And I am changing now the overall report output style to the harvest style. Had that golden effect. I'm also changing my proc print a little bit here. I have a var statement now that says just list the country ID, the population, and that net primary percent, the one that I calculated an average for, without using any of the coloration style options that I created in my formats. Those will just come out on the report. But then I have a second var statement where I do have the slash and I do have the style option to that data location, again, where I'm applying my formats to just these two columns. And so you can see here, you can use as many var statements as you need to. They are adjunctive on the report, but now some columns will have my formats applied to them and some columns will not. That's really handy. That's very useful. And so again, I'm just running the one print and I'm closing up that workbook and canceling the titles. So let me go ahead and run this version of the report. And we'll see, again, very nice coloration here. But you'll note only the two school percent columns are being colorized, not the net primary percent, not country ID, not population. And as I go down, those are the only two columns affected. Now let's go into the workbook. And when we open this up now, we'll see down below, the tab is now named what I named it, Education Data. I have my different style applied, Harvest, and here are my titles. Here are the column headers, and those are now frozen. They're not going to scroll off as I scroll down the page for the rest of the report. You'll also note I've got white over here on all of these. Remember, in my format, when I did not have a percent and I didn't apply a format, well, I guess white must be the harvest default for a non-formatted value. But the two columns that I added are colorized, as you see in the Excel workbook. All right, so far so good. In my third version here, what I want to do is change and have more than one spreadsheet go into my workbook. And so I'm changing the style to Barrett's Blue. And I have the sheet name up here of Education Data All. And this is the one where I'm applying my formats to all the different columns. Then I have another ODS statement. I'm not closing the file yet. I have another ODS Excel option statement to say, all right, after that first print, change the title and also change the spreadsheet name that I want to generate with the following print. And so I'm changing the spreadsheet name. And this is the version where I'm only going to highlight the school percent columns. And then finally, I have a third print, changing the title again, changing again the spreadsheet name. And I'm only leaving country ID and population without applying my format. And I am going to apply the different style options to all of the percentage columns now, including my net primary percent column. And then I finally close the file and cancel the titles. So let me go up and run all of this. Should not take, oops, went a little too far. Here we go. Let's run that. And again, this HTML blue is going to remain in effect for the output that is generated into the results window. So here's report 1. And then here's report 2 with just the school percent columns being highlighted. And then finally, when we get down below, we have all 3 with our third report. So here we do see that is generated all 3 different reports into the results window. I'm going to open up Excel now. And here we have this Barrett's Blue style. You can see we do have 3 different tabs. This is the all data set. This is the one where only the school percents are highlighted. And this last tab has all 3 of the percentage columns highlighted. Now, I pointed out Barrett's Blue naturally has this gray background. And so when we do not apply our formats, that's what comes out in the Barrett's Blue style. And we can see it here in the school percent. But when I go back to the first one, when I applied my format to all the columns, you'll note I had an other in my background format that said, for all other values other than those percent values, make the background white. And so my format actually did apply here to these 2 columns because I included them on the underscore all underscore var statement to apply my formats to it. And so you should probably be selective. If you have an overall style, you should be selected to what columns that you apply your different attributes to. And of course, populations and country IDs are not 0.8 and 0.7. They're not percentages. So in applying them to those columns, we see the numbers. The numbers just come out based on the data being stored, but the background did apply because it fell into that other category, the way I defined my format. Now, again, in all these cases, I froze the column headers. You can see we've got the first 4 rows up to this row that has the column headers are all frozen in all of the different worksheets. And if we get down, we have all the nice coloration. Okay, we're doing pretty well. Now, I don't know that our data is really meant to be kind of blended into a single worksheet, but there is a way to do that using the ODS Excel. And I just wanted to show you this. It's called sheet interval is the option, and you just set it to a none. And then every new procedure you run will not go to a new tab or a new worksheet. It'll just simply continue entering the results into the one tab. And so I added yet one more option in my ODS Excel statement so that we can see the 2 different reports I have here go to the same tab in the workbook. Also, instead of saying on with frozen headers, you do have the ability to say how many rows you want to freeze just by a number. And so I have been using 2 title statements in the past. Here I have 3, and then that means I showed you there were 4 rows before. With the third title, we need 5 rows frozen, and we'll see that that freezes just fine also by using that number. I changed the style to ocean here just to see yet another style that we can utilize that's distinctive. So I'm going to run this last Excel version. And as I've been showing you, in the results, we just see the various different reports coming out. There we go. And here's the second report. Sorry, scrolled a little fast there. Let's go to the workbook. And so this is ocean style. This is the all version. And I did freeze the first 5 rows, so we can see that that's just what's happening. But if I go past the first report, here's my second proc print, all in the same tab. And I do have the same titles and column headers, but those will scroll. Only the first 5 rows are stationary and frozen, And now I have both reports here in the one tab. Again, probably for our data, this wasn't the best option, but I just wanted to show you that it was an option if you have different circumstances where you want everything to go in the one spreadsheet. Okay. Now, I want to move on to just showing you a way to now create a different output style and or a different output file. We've been using Excel all along here, but what if I wanted to produce an Adobe Acrobat report? Well, instead of ODS Excel, I just change my ODS statement to say I want to create a PDF file. And when I change the destination, this name is called the destination of the output format we want to create, I also have to change the extension to that file name to reflect this new formatted file I want to create. And so I said, create a trafficlight.pdf file on my ODS statement. And each one of these destinations has different options based on the format that you're trying to produce. I am adding another style called NetDraw. And it was another delivered style for the overall report. But I also have this option that is pretty Adobe specific, Acrobat specific. It's PDFTOC, table of contents. And I'm setting it so that the table of contents that actually does occur when you generate one of these files by default enters the names for the table of contents at their very highest level, so that they're not opened up like you would open up a folder and see all the files within it. I just want to see the folder or the highest level of the name for this one report in the table of contents. Now I have my titles here, and I changed in my session, this is a session option statement. It's a global option statement. From portrait to landscape, I want my orientation to be wide. And this, when I output PDF style output, by default, a date and time will come out, and I'm just suppressing that date and time from going out to the PDF. There is another option. The date and times that would come out are basically the time you started your SAS session. DT reset, if you were to use that, would ensure that you get the current date and time written out, but I'm suppressing the date and time altogether here with that. Then what I have a second ODS statement. This is not a destination statement. This is one that says, I want to create a label for this next running procedure of education-all. And this label for ODS output is going to go into the table of contents for the next print. Then I'm going to reset the page number back to 1 because I'm generating a new report. And if I don't do that, by default, SAS just keeps adding page numbers with all new output. So I'm resetting the page number to 1, setting a new title 2, and setting a new proc label for the second report that I'm going to generate. The first report was using that _all_ version of the data. The second report has the 3 columns that I'm not applying my style options and the 2 that I am. And then I have a third report here. Again, reset the page to 1 with a new title and a new table of contents entry. And this one is the one where all the percentages are being having the style options applied to it. I will close up the PDF file. I cancel my titles and reset the orientation to portrait. So let me run this last one for this example set. And this time we'll be generating a PDF and not Excel. Again, the standard results window is going to have all 3 of the reports. Here's the 2 school columns. Here's the 3% version. And now I'm going to open up now a PDF. Boom. All right. So this is in Adobe Acrobat. My page number is 1 here, and here is the overall style. This was NetDraw. And off to the left here is my table of contents, and it is all closed up. That's why I said PDF TOC equal 1. I could have set it so that it actually presented when I opened the file to a lower level, but I liked having it just at the higher level. And then I can click on these and actually go to the top of that next report. So here I'm going to say, go to the next report. And here is the version where I just highlighted the school percentages, starting again at page number 1. And then finally, here is the version where I have all the percentages highlighted, and again, starting at page 1. And these were those proc labels that came out in the table of contents. Many other destination types. We have PowerPoint is a destination type. We have rich text format for any word processor to process into. There's comma sensitive value, CSV output we can generate using ODS, and it's as simple as what I've been showing you for Excel and for the PDF. It's an open statement, might have some options on it, and then finally when you're done, there's a close statement to close up that destination. All right, so that is this first example version. I'm going to go back to the slides, and there is one more example that I want to talk through with a brief overview, and then we'll get to the code on this as well. All right, so I now have work.education, right? I have that data set already, and what I want to do is I want to create a series of filtered detail reports as HTML report output. And so off to the left here, you see I have all of these HTML files, and these are filtered based on the percentages of that net primary percent column that we calculated and placed into work.education. It's the average for each country. And so any country that has a 90% or above, I want that to go into this report, net prime 90. For 80 up to but not including 90%, I want it to go to this HTML report, net prime 80, and so on. The prime 00 is for all of those rows where I had missing data for both school percent columns. And so I'm going to simply use ODS HTML statements instead of ODS Excel or ODS PDF to generate this set of files. And we'll look at that after I generate them. Now, taking work education, I'm also going to massage that data and create a second data set here called work.education sum. And how I'm going to massage it is I'm going to take the data in work education and basically, based on those same percentages that I created my different detail files for HTML reporting, I'm going to put the data into different groups based on those same percentages. As well, I want to get some grouped values. And so I'm going to get counts of how many rows went into each group, and then I'm going to take an average for the group of what that overall percentage is. So I'll have some summary data based on the groupings, and that's going to go into this work.education sum data set. All right, now I'm still going to use some ODS style options, but this time the option isn't going to be for coloration or for font. It's going to be to create a hyperlink from my summary data, which I will generate a nice HTML report of the summary data. I'm going to create a hyperlink from that summary report so that I can simply click on the report for one of those groups, and it will take me back to the detailed report for that group and display the detail. Now, to align the hyperlinks properly, I'm going to use our good friend proc format to align based on the grouped values we created to the right files for the detail that will represent that data. So let's go see this again. So I'm going further down in my same program. This is the same program file that you'll have for reference. And what I am doing is a single SQL step, using ProcSQL to create this summary table, education sum. And I'm using a case expression to do the groupings, to essentially say, when I have a net primary percent that's greater than or equal to 0.9, set this new variable to a group value that is 90 plus, group A 90 plus. And that value, that's actually a character value that will be assigned for that row to this new column called lit group, literacy group. Then if I have a row that's 80% or up to and not including 90%, I'm going to set lit group to group B 80. And again, based on all of these different groupings, I now will have this new column, lit group, that will have an actual value, a data assignment value of these different groups and their character, but that's fine. Okay. So I'm really creating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different groups. And then after that, so comma, I'm going to count and average and round to the nearest hundredth. I'm creating 2 columns that'll hold the count and the averages based on groupings of that lit group value I just created. So I'm going to have the summary data group by group by group. I'll have a count and an average for each group. And I'm doing all of this in the one SQL step, creating the groups and creating the summarized data. And I'm just going to go ahead and report that a little bit. So I did a select star after I created the data set. And here now is this data. You can see I now have the 7 groups and their counts and their percentages. Well, this is the report that I want to generate for my summary output, and I want to put it into HTML. But before I do that, because I want to link, essentially, I want to be able to link from these different group values to the detail reports that these groups represent. And so I'm going to have to create another format to set up that relationship between the groups and the files. Before going there, I do want to show you just a couple of other options. I did the entire grouping and summarizing in this one SQL step, but I could have just run a data step to form the groups. Instead, this is very much like a case expression. It's a select statement in a data step, and we set up the groups that way. We don't have the summary data yet, so if I use this technique, I would have had to have followed it with either a proc means to generate the counts and the averages for each group. You can see here I said class is lit group, which basically does the group statistics for me. And then down below, another alternative to generate those summary values would be to actually run an SQL step again to get the count and the rounded average, just like we did in the one SQL step. So I could have had a data step followed by some other step that would have done the averages for me. I do have a fourth alternative to all of this that is data step only. And in that data step, it would take the place of that original data step where I created work education and the SQL step where I created education sum, and it creates both of these outputs all in one step. and it reads your data one time. It's very efficient, but it's a little more involved because you have to think through the data step logic in order to make that happen. I do have that in this program lower down, and I'm not going to go review that, but it is there for you to review on your own if you choose to later. All right, well, let me get to the first step of creating the detail reports. Then we'll get to the format that I need in order to relate the groupings to these reports. And then finally, we'll generate our summary report and show that we can link from the summary report to the details. Now, this is a good point in the program where you may think that it would be beneficial to do something a little less hard-coded, maybe something like creating a macro that could generate these various different proc prints based on the different groupings. I didn't want to do that. I'm just hard coding each one of these proc prints with a different ODS HTML pointing to a different data set. I'm using the style Barrett's Blue for all of them. I have different titles. I do have pretty much the same report where I'm not applying my style options to country ID and population, but I am to all of the percentage columns. And then I have a different where statement for each one of these proc prints. And one by one, this is essentially HTML close ends this one proc print. This one will have all the rows where the net primary percent is greater than or equal to 0.9. Then I have another of the same, pretty much the same step, except my where statement is different and my title statement's different and my output file is different. So this will generate the 0.8 all the way up to, but not including 0.9 set of rows. And likewise, I have a 70 to 80, a 60 to 70, a 50 to 60, less than 50, and finally where I had my missing values. So I'm just going to run all of these. And here we go. Just going to run. Each one of these will be creating a different HTML output. And you could see we did generate all these different files just right here in Enterprise Guide. I could browse through my results window and see all these various different reports. Okay. I'm going to go, I've been collecting all these, right? All my output has been going to this location that I set up for my macro variable. And I can actually see here all of the different HTML files I created. You can also see all of the workbooks and the PDF that I created earlier because I was pushing them out to this same location. But let me go, I'm just going to click on the Net Prime 60 just to see one of these detail reports into a browser. And oops, popped up over here, I have to drag it. And here's this report. So this is the detail. I'm looking at it in a browser window. Pretty nice. All right, well, these files are now all generated. I can look at another one. Here is the 70 to 79 report. I could click on any one and now see them in a browser window because this is really in an HTML tag set style file. All right, so those files are out there. The detail files are out there. I'm going to now generate my format. And I'm taking those character values that I set up for each group and relating it to the particular HTML file that represents the detail rows for that grouping. Simple, 7 different lines to 7 different files. The name of the format is $link. And whenever you have character data that you're trying to transform, you need to put a $sign in front of the name that you create your format with. So here's my value statement, and $link is the name of the format. Let's go run this and get it out there. Perfect. $link has been output. And finally, I'm going to generate my summary report. So once again, it's an ODS HTML output. This one's going to be called netprime_summary. I have a couple of titles representing the summarized data. And now in this data set, I have these three variables: lit group, count, and average. For the lit group, style, data, again, I'm applying it to the data, which happens to be those character groupings. I now have a new style option called URL. And you'll note I'm applying my format $link to that URL option, so that if I have a certain group, we're going to link it to the correct file that represents that group of detailed rows. And I'm only doing it for the one column that has the different groups. Count, I'm not applying any style options. It'll just be a number. And then the average is where I'm going to, again, apply my various different background colors and font weights to that one column in my report for summarizing the data. HTML close, I'm done. So let's go ahead, I'll run this, make sure it gets out to my folder. Well, that's good, I see it here in the results tab. I'm gonna go to my folder window, and here is netprime_summary. There we go. And I'm gonna click on that file. It's an HTML file, should come up in my browser. There we go. And we can see I did colorize the average percents just on this report, the summary report. But now I want to go see some of the detail related to these different groupings. So let me click on, I don't know, let's click on group 60. That should have some different colors. I'm going to click on that, and boom, up comes my detail report. Very, very cool. All right, let's pick another one. Let's go to 50. Again, should have a pretty good color dispersion, and oh, okay, a lot of red, meaning that these countries have some lower education percentages. But again, here's the detail. If I click on the 90, we should see a lot of green. So let me click there. Yep, that's exactly what we're seeing. It's perfect, all the detail. All right. So now we've seen a couple of different ways that we can apply style options. I do have this slide that explains various different documentation links that I've provided for you. I'll show you those. Well, let's go now. Let me go. Let's see, do I have a browser here? Yeah, I opened up all these links so you can see them. The first link I have goes to the print procedure, and it's specifically to an area in the documentation that says use ODS styles with ProcPrint. And I want to particularly, it goes into a lot of detail. I want to particularly show you this chart that's in this location, because here are many more style options than the ones we've used. And there's this chart gives you kind of a chart of the various areas on the different kinds of procedures where we can add these ODS style options. You can see ProcPrint is all the way over to the right. We have some ProcTabulate columns and ProcReport columns. And so I'll leave this to you to investigate. Down further is these locations where we can apply certain options. And I've been using the data, which is down here, right? I've been applying options to data, but we can apply it to a by label or a grand total line, a header line. So again, different reports have different locations where you can apply the various different style options. This next documentation link shows you many of the style options in detail. And as you go down, here's a background color, and so on. And it goes into more detail of the various options that you can apply using ODS style options. Then there's the print procedure statement itself Again, this is a nice discussion about the statement and the procedure of ProcPrint. But then down below, as you go further down, it gets to, again, here are the various locations where you can apply style options and some of the coloring, etc. I do have a link to the various different color codes that you can use for style options. And so here, RGB colors, you can see they're more than I used, but RGB and the HLS and the grayscale and the SAS names are pretty typical ones, and you can investigate that further. And then lastly, I have a link to all of the ODS language statements. This is the dictionary, and it gives you the various destinations and some of the other statements, such as like proc label that we used, etc. So here is that navigation to this dictionary of the ODS statements. All right, finally, here is a GitHub location where I have placed a number of files having to do with this discussion. When you get to that location, there is a folder called demos. And then in that demos folder, I've placed these files, all starting with the prefix traffic light. So I have a traffic light slides.pdf, which in there you'll be able to link to all of those documentation locations, the links I've tested in work. There is a traffic light program, which is my SAS program from start to finish with all of the code that we talked about. There is a documentation PDF where I actually have the navigation, how to get to those links that I provided for you step by step. And then there are 4 other PDFs having to do with the various color codes. All those files are in this GitHub location. 2 other things I want to mention. One is there is a wonderful report writing course at SAS that goes into Proc Report and Proc Tabulate in a good deal of detail. And along the way, they talk also about adding ODS style options in those 2 procedures at SAS. So it's a very good course if you want to investigate more. And then finally, there are lots of books. There are many technical references having to do with all of it, right? ODS, ProcPrint, formats, all of the various features we used that I hope were not really anything new to you, just using them a different way. I hope this was a valuable learning experience for you. My intent was to present programming that is not overly complex, but is just applying concepts you already know in some additional creative ways. Best of luck in your future programming. Now go do great SAS things. Thank you.